Okay, so good morning to everyone. Good morning to those of you who are in the meeting room, Zoom meeting room. Thank you for joining us. We are now in week 9, and this is our 7th lecture. And the lecture or topic for this week is Pius Wingti and the Look North policy. So apart from those of you who are in the Zoom meeting room, I also extend a welcome to our viewers on Facebook, as well as those who will be watching on YouTube. So this morning, once again, we have our sessional lecturer, Mr. Lawi Ako, with us. And he was, during his tenure as a foreign service officer, he was stationed in Beijing, China as well. So it would be good to listen to him and his experience in China, and then relate that to Pius Wingti's Look North policy. So we continue to look at PNG's foreign policy and look at the significant players or prominent actors in our foreign policy since independence, since 1975. So, Mr. Ako, please, the virtual microphone is yours. You can continue the talk.
Thank you very much, Mr. Yagira. And thank you very much, class. I'll share the screen now. Becoming an expert in this. On the first try, it went on. So, okay, our topic, as Mr. Yagira said, is on Wingti and the Look North policy. Go straight ahead into it. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, a lot was already happening in Papua New Guinea, especially around its borders with Indonesia and in the immediate region in general. The universal approach had been crucial in making these critical connections through bilateral and multilateral means, and all this in a bid to set the stage for our economic development aspirations in the region as a newly independent nation. This also included connectivity initiatives taken by our flag carrier New Guinea to expand its fleets and extend its domestic routes, as well as international services between 1980 and 84. And the opportunities abound with the onset of the Asian century in the same period. Unknowingly, PNG was supporting the forward movement of open regionalism, while it jockeyed valiantly for partnerships in the region against a backdrop of rising crime levels and domestic security issues, less than a decade after gaining independence from Australia. The start of the Bougainville crisis added to this woe. Okay, so the Look North policy at work. Following the promulgation of this new approach after 1981, where issues of national development arrangements and interests were to be identified and actively pursued in the international arena, a whole series of foreign policy initiatives followed. These were categorized in the following eras. So the period between 1980 and 1985 can be seen as a period in which PNG consolidated its existing relations with key neighboring and historically important countries and important multilateral organizations. PNG also assisted Vanuatu to independence in 1980, and then important negotiations affecting various aspects of PNG's national interests, such as development cooperation and border management arrangements, were also undertaken within this period with our neighbors, Australia and Indonesia, and other Melanesian countries. In 1985, the third Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea, Mr. Pius Wingti, building on from policy configurations cascading from the selective and active engagement approach, stated his government's foreign policy as one of independent commitment to international cooperation. This would be between 1985 and 1988. Prime Minister Wingti was concerned that PNG was all too often reacting to international development rather than having specific policy options to base these reactions upon. So under this game plan, the government moved to consolidate relations with its important neighbors, Indonesia, under the Treaty of Mutual Respect, Friendship and Cooperation, and Australia under the Joint Declaration of Principles. A bilateral development cooperation treaty was also signed with Australia to manage Australian aid in PNG. The picture you can see here is during Grand Chief Sepolis Matane's visit to China in 1996. in 2006 to commemorate the 30th anniversary of bilateral relations. Okay. So a major feature of the post-colonial relations has always been a degree of direct budgetary support PNG receives from Australia. In the immediate post-independence years, Australia covered about 40% of PNG's total government revenue. By the 1980s, this had been reduced somewhat, but Australia continued to provide between 25 to 25% up to the middle of the decade. So against this, Australia benefited from a clear advantage in the balance of trade, and Australian-based multinationals were in the forefront in the exploitation of PNG's enormous mineral resources. This unequal relationship was a source of considerate resentment at various times. Beyond the offense to nationalistic sensitivities, budgetary dependence posed important practical difficulties in that PNG remained vulnerable to the changes of the Australian economy. So the extent of this vulnerability was illustrated in mid-1986 when, with a minimum of consultation and forewarning, budgetary aid was cut by about 10 million Australian dollars in response to economic difficulties in Australia. This represented an resignment of the third post-independence quinquennial aid agreement, which had been negotiated less than a year previously in September 1985. The cut resulted in a reduction of about 5% in PNG's total government revenue. Prime Minister Wingti, at the time of Australia's default, was a member of a younger generation than that of Somare and Chen. So as well as being the first premier from the less developed Highlands region, Prime Minister Wingti was also the first to have served his political apprenticeship entirely in the post-independence period. You see, he was the new breed of our leaders. So, although far from radical in conventional ideological terms, his People's Democratic Movement, originally a breakaway from Somare's Pangu Party, was nevertheless part of a nationalistic trend in Papua New Guinea's politics, associated with a new cohort of political leaders. So this tendency was more evident in his foreign policy than in his domestic economic and social policies, which were strongly market-oriented and anti-statist. Now, negotiations on the aid agreement in the latter part of 1986 and throughout the following year culminated in December 1987 with the signing of the Joint Declaration of Principles between Prime Ministers Wingti and Hawke. The economic clauses of the JDP did not explicitly state the terms of a new relationship. By implication, however, the JDP foreshadowed a more significant position for bilateral trade vis-a-vis aid and a great degree of specific project assistance rather than the general budgetary subvention which had formed the basis of development aid since 1975. So in emphasizing trade rather than aid, Wingti was to an extent merely making a political venture of economic necessity. The Australian subvention had been cut, and there was little prospect that it would be reinstated at anything like the previous joint action in the event of an attack on either regional security of the Southwest Pacific level. The precise means by which the balance of trade between the two countries was to be altered were not, however, spelled out, either in the JDP itself or in subsequent elaborations. In view of the absence of a significant manufacturing sector in Papua New Guinea, the imbalance was destined this time to be to continue unless it was merely to be transferred to another trading partner. So a widely predicted mineral boom had, however, created considerable economic optimism in Papua New Guinea in the mid-1980s. This no doubt encouraged Wingti in predicting an eventual alteration in the country's overall economic relations. Gold, oil, and gas were still, strictly speaking, primary products, but their potential for reversing the financial terms of trade were infinitely greater than the traditional ones of coffee, cocoa, and copra. The acceptance of the defense agreement by Australia was attributable to two separate developments in regional international relations. Firstly, the PNG-Indonesia bilateral relations had improved markedly in the period immediately preceding the signing of the JDP, and the risk of a major conflict between the two countries was low. Secondly, and crucially, PNG's security concerns chimed with new developments in Australian strategic thinking. The coincidence of interest, although based on the pursuit of different goals, is the adjustments of relations between the ex-colony and the ex-metropole. A major review published in 1986, this is the DEEB report, heralded a fundamental reordering of Australia's strategic priorities. DEEB had rejected the concept of wide-ranging post-projection capability in favor of the concentration of defense resources in a tightly defined area of primary strategic interest. So this area was defined in geographical terms, with the Southwest Pacific forming a major part of it. A central component of the new strategy was to be the promotion of a sense of strategic community in the region. The new approach was consolidated in a white paper in 1987 and in a series of statements by the Australian Defence Minister at the time, Honourable Kim Beazley, in the period prior to the signing of the JDP. Papua New Guinea's objective of securing an equally bilateral defence agreement, therefore, married neatly with the Australia's newly acquired concern with the regional security of the Southwest Pacific. This new thinking was not universally accepted in the Labour cabinet of the time. It was reported that the then Foreign Minister Bill Hayden had considerable objections to this agreement, seeing it as a dangerous blank check which could encourage recklessness on the part of Papua New Guinea in its relations with Indonesia. The new approach prevailed, however, and was confirmed by Hayden's successor Gareth Evans, who came to office in September 1988. Mr. Evans defined the new Pacific Doctrine as one of constructive commitment. So, consolidating the substance of foreign policy making. So, motivated by a multiplicity of concerns involving diplomatic, security, and economic interests, Australia provided considerable material help. In mid-1989, following urgent representations from PNG's Defence Minister, Honourable Benai Sabume, it was agreed to accelerate the delivery of 4 military helicopters, which had previously been offered to PNG under routine defence cooperation agreements. So this was followed by the supply of considerable quantity of small arms and other materials. Most significantly, perhaps, Australia agreed at a post-JDP ministerial forum in January 1990 to finance, equip, and train the equivalent of a new battalion for the PNGDF. Bougainville served as a sharp corrective to the assumptions in the diplomatic negotiations, and the potential of natural resources were of themselves capable of removing fundamental dependencies from the post-colonial relationship. The long-term consequences of the Bougainville crisis for PNG-Australia relations remains unclear. Beyond the question of military dependency, the cost of the Bougainville operations and the loss of income from the mine, which had provided about 19% of the national budget and 43% of foreign currency earnings, were ruinous to the national economy. In January 1990, PNG's currency, which was one of the most buoyant in the third world, was devalued. And following urgent request, Australia directed budgetary aid was increased by about 20 million Australian dollars, with a similar sum for longer-term military assistance. Hand in hand with the reversion of two major aid donations came a heightening of national sensitivities as the frustration of dependence took its inevitable toll. There was no guarantee that Australia's support for central government had added to its long-term credit. Attitude towards the handling of the Bougainville crisis were divided among parliamentarians and even the cabinet itself. The composition of any future government and therefore the disposition of its members towards Australia remain wholly unpredictable. It is not inconceivable that in the swirling logic of parliamentary politics in PNG, Australia's support for the ultimately unsuccessful military campaign against the secessionist movement could be to the longer-term disadvantage of the relationship. Certainly, Australia's support for the central government disqualified it from mediating role, and after the military options had failed. So this responsibility fell to New Zealand, which had traditionally concentrated its regional foreign policy on Polynesia to the east. Now, although important sections of the parliamentary opposition criticized its signing, Prime Minister Wingti's successors have continued to operate within its spirit. Okay, this is really talking about the foreign policy now. So Indonesia's interest in PNG have been advanced in the post-treaty period in some remarkable ways. For instance, an inquiry in 1987 into the financial affairs of Wingti's foreign minister and leader of the Papuan bloc in parliament, Honorable Ted Diro, uncovered a US $140,000 contribution to his election fund from the Indonesian Armed Forces Chief Benny Murdani. So far from suffering a reverse to his political career, however, Diro went on to become Prime Minister Namaliu's Deputy Prime Minister in 1990. General Mudani, it emerged, had also established personal relationship with the commander of the PNGDF then, Brigadier General Tony Huai, who, unlike Diro, suffered in consequence. So upset in Indonesia's behalf at the security terms of the Joint Declaration of Principles, JDP, with Australia, General Huai made his objections public and was dismissed following protests from Australia. So the cordiality of the relationships with Indonesia after the mid-1980s was mainly a result of the acceptance by Papua New Guinea's government that their room for initiative was extremely limited, much more so than in their relationship with Australia. So with nothing to be gained otherwise, concord was preferable to antagonism. Partly too, it was grounded on the growing conviction that Indonesia had neither the inclination nor the capacity to pursue an expansionist policy across the border into Papua New Guinea. So just as the invasion of East Timor and the anti-separatist campaign in Irian Jaya had provoked much of Papua New Guinea's original fears, the evident incapacity of the Indonesians to effectively impose their will on these territories ultimately served to allay these fears away. Yeah? So it is paradoxical then, though maybe perhaps not perhaps coincidental, that Australia was finally willing to accept a degree of security cooperation with PNG through the JDP, just at the time when the major perceived threat to the security had receded. So Indonesia's policy towards PNG appeared to be based on the encouragement of a strong central government in Port Moresby as the best means of maintaining stability on the border. The cultivation of important local politicians like Diro was clearly one aspect of this. Another more surprising one, given the mistrust and suspicion that often infected the Indonesia-Australia relationship, was Indonesia's edging of greater Australian involvement as a stabilizing force in Papua New Guinea's internal affairs. So for the Indonesian government, with its chronic dread of territorial fragmentation, the Bougainville crisis in PNG was very worrying to them. So it was to be viewed with conscience as a general source of instability in a large neighbor. But in its specific form, it was to be feared as an uncomfortably successful-looking separatist rebellion. And it concerns in Indonesia very much, but they had separatist movements domestically. So another one across the border was very worrying to them indeed. Now, ASEAN. You see, during the time of the Wingti government, there was a degree of interdepartmental conflict over these issues between between the pro-ASEAN office of the Prime Minister and the more cautious Department of Foreign Affairs. Now, in the event the dispute was academic, having been settled by the ASEAN states themselves, the one advantage of ASEAN membership to PNG would have been a much higher international profile. ASEAN would have become perhaps the major focus and channel of Papua New Guinea's foreign policy. There is every likelihood that there was this political gain as much as any putative economic ones that engaged Prime Minister Wingti's interests. Full membership of ASEAN would have represented a decisive reorientation of international relations away from the Australian axis. While the optimism While the optimum rhythm would have involved economic as well as political gains, the latter alone would probably have been regarded as sufficient. So this can be a reason why everyone was paying lip service to the APEC membership, while all eyes look towards the elusive prize, full membership of ASEAN. I personally don't understand why ASEAN is so important in the PNG's foreign relations at the moment. Now, this is a APEC cooperation in preparation for APEC 2018. And the ASEAN caucus's importance to APEC. The picture shows us meeting with then Indonesian Foreign Minister Dr. Mati Natalegawa. This was in December 2013 after Indonesia had completed its host, and we had written back the before the disbandment of the Indonesian APEC team to get best practices and some ideas from host. Now, South Pacific, our biggest playing ground, where we feel that we are big fishing. Well, anyway, at various times, PNG has been closer to some states than others. St. Michael established and maintained close personal relationship with Ratu Sekama of Fiji, and over the years they acquired and cultivated the image of joint fathers of the Pacific independence. So following the military coup in Fiji in May 1987, the Wingti government, motivated perhaps by a more specific Melanesian nationalism, was the first to recognize the new regime, although only after several months, and it was also in the forefront of deflecting regional and international criticisms of it. Coming between Somar and Wingti, however, said Julius Chen was not so fortunate in his relationship with Fiji. See, Ratumara, who was supported at home in PNG by St. Michael, was one of the fiercest critics of the interventions in Vanuatu by PNG. The pan-Melanesian outlook, which motivated Wingti's defense of post-coup Fiji, along with the perception of Polynesian conservatism, caused a narrowing of the South Pacific dimension of Papua New Guinea's foreign policy in the later parts of the 1980s. A distinctly sub-regional perspective emerged with the cultivation of close links with the Solomon Islands and Vanuatu. Aside from shared ethnicity, PNG had particular ties with both of these Melanesian countries. The specific relationship with Vanuatu had been set up by the 1980 intervention and carefully maintained thereafter. It was further consolidated in 1988 when PNG came close to a second intervention in support of Prime Minister Lini, when his leadership was challenged from within his own parties amidst domestic social disorder. Wingti's pan-Melanesian outlook was not shared by St. Michael, who, when in opposition, attacked what he saw as its unacceptable exclusiveness. Prime Minister Wingti's enthusiasm for Melanesian sub-regionalism, he suggested, was merely a mark of his inexperience in respect of the greater Pacific region. Yet, whether focused on this broader region or on the Melanesian sub-region, the South Pacific was probably the most successful dimension of Papua New Guinea's foreign policy in the 1980s. As a third world region, albeit a relatively well-favored one politically and economically, the South Pacific posed none of the problems of post-colonial adjustments which tend to make PNG's relationship with Australia so fraught at times. Also, consisting predominantly of microstates, the South Pacific Islands had offered at least the possibility of a leadership role, however circumscribed by Polynesian wariness, which the company of the tigers of the Southeast Asia could not. So for these reasons, it was also a region in which the third major dimension of PNG foreign policy was particularly important, that of intergovernmental organizations. Now, the multilateral factor, see, the rejection of the non-aligned movement and the elusiveness of ASEAN membership, notwithstanding, multilateralism has been a central feature of the foreign policies of successive governments since independence. But did they understood its intrinsic nature fully? Although this has involved a degree of activism in global organizations, In common with other comparable states, it has been the regional level which has been the most significant. The larger forums have been important primarily for the wider mediation of regional issues. So PNG was in the forefront of the moves at the UN in 1986 to have New Caledonia re-inscribed on the list of the non-self-governing territories. Successive governments in the 1980s expressed their interest in following in Fiji's steps by participating in UN peacekeeping operations as a means of finding a practical purpose for a professional army in a relatively stable region. PNG has also been prominent in the internal diplomacy of the Commonwealth, though again on regional rather than global issues. But the national impact on global institutions is inevitably limited. This was a lesson brought home to a disgruntled Prime Minister Wingti at the 1987 Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Vancouver, Canada, where his advocacy of a conciliatory attitude towards post-coup Fiji, which he had made a major issue at the year's South Pacific Forum, was largely ignored. It has therefore been in the organizations of the South Pacific that PNG's activism has been more evident and where it has had greater effect. The Mainland Spearhead Group, I think we can thank the PNGDF for the establishment of the MSG, well, the government and using the PNGDF as the vehicle. See, this cleavage was of a long-standing, but at certain junctures, it became particularly evident. The Vanuatu crisis surrounding its independence and PNG's intervention in 1980 was one. The problem of New Caledonia between 1986 and 1988 was another. At that time, an initiative on the part of Wingti led to the establishment of a distinct organization, the Mainland Spearhead Group, embracing PNG, the Solomon Islands, and Vanuatu. It began in 1986 as an informal caucus, and then after the signing of the agreed principles for cooperation in March 1988, it emerged as a formal intergovernmental organization. Restricted to 3 members, with no significant influence outside the region and only limited scope of internal integration, the MSG was a far cry from a formidable international institution. It did, however, serve as an important function in PNG's overall foreign policy. Melanesia was the one geographical focus of PNG's international relations in which a leadership role was feasible. In the broader South Pacific, where the emergence of such an identity might have been expected simply by virtue of Papua New Guinea's size and resources, its accession was made difficult by the inter-ethnic suspicions. The narrowness of the spearhead's ethnic range, however, removed this obstacle through reducing although it reduced the significance of the leadership role also. So the return to office of Semicolon as foreign minister in 1988 did not lead to the demise of the MSG, as some had predicted. His antipathy towards what he saw as the fragmentation of the Pacific regionalism stopped short of a formal withdrawal from the agreed principles. However, he did not exert himself in support of the body and shown of much of the raison d'etre by the 1988 Matignon Agreement over New Caledonia, its continued relevance was questionable. So was it worth it pursuing the national identity through the MSG? That's a good question. In the mid and late 1980s, the Wingti government certainly appeared to be applying the tenets of the white paper, for our white paper on active and selective engagement. But that is not to say that it did so in conscious conformity with its terms. You see, it had already been argued that the white paper was, in one sense, simply an obvious framework for a foreign policy planning of any small state. It is, however, worth recalling too that just as Wingti's activism came several years after the white paper, one of the most activist episodes in Papua New Guinean foreign policy, the 1980 intervention of Vanuatu, predated it. The major initiatives of Papua New Guinea's foreign policy appear to have been determined by a combination of external circumstances and leadership style. regardless of the existence of a formal blueprint. The white paper was probably more important at the bureaucratic level, where it provided a general statement of what foreign policy was and how it should be conducted for a young and inexperienced first generation of officers. It made clear that foreign policy was somewhat that was made was something that was made rather than a series of events that simply happened. This was an educative function that the vague generalities of universalism could never provide. The question of initiative versus response must also be seen in the context of particular relationships. The evident freedom of movement available to PNG in its relationship with Australia has already been remarked. So too had the coincidence of foreign policy objectives between the two states. So in the late 1980s, PNG and Australia were pursuing ends which, although separate, were to an extent parallel. The JDP appeared to be a victory for the new assertiveness in PNG's foreign policy. What is unclear, however, was whether the redefinition of the relationship implied in the JDP would have been possible had it not coincided with the changes in Australia's own foreign policy, own foreign and defense policies, with the emphasis on a more sensitive, active, and constructive commitment. PNG also operated in a favorable foreign policy environment at the regional level. Exclusion from ASEAN and the consequent limitations on its Southeast Asian axis somewhat restricted the regional dimensions to PNG's foreign policy. But it also insulated PNG from the various political and security problems confronting Southeast Asia. Instead, PNG was left to concentrate on the calmer South Pacific Islands. A number of developments in Oceania in the late 1980s, such as the apparent importation of superpower competition, Libyan incursion, colonial and nuclear conflicts, and the Fiji coups caused many to pronounce the end of its international innocence. This is in relation to the Pacific. For PNG, however, such low-level crises provided distinct foreign policy opportunities. This included a regional leadership role, albeit at the limited Melanesian level, and on the larger scale, whether on the New Caledonia issue at the UN or the Fiji crisis in the Commonwealth, PNG's pronouncements commanded an attention from a newly concerned world. And happily too, these various crises affecting the region all appear to recede before posing any serious challenge to PNG's own status or security. This challenge, when it did come, was to be internally generated. Now, whether the effectiveness of foreign policy, Papua New Guinea's fundamental weakness was always evident in the domestic environment. This was whether in the areas of public order or in the management of the often competing demands of the regions and provinces. When in 1989, one set of such demand escalated into a violent separatist campaign on Bougainville, this weakness spilled over into the areas of external relations. Okay, so the major impact of the crisis was on the national economy, but it is likely to have considerable effect too on Papua New Guinea's regional profile and therefore on its foreign policy options. Now, this is looking north, the look north aspect of it. This is during the Governor General's Police Martinez visit to China in 2006 to commemorate the 30th anniversary of our bilateral relations. This was the former President Hu Jintao, when I had the opportunity of meeting him also. All those, what I've talked about, this is the main reference. I took them out from McQueen's 1991 review. I have my own interpretations of Wingti's Look North foreign policy, which was followed immediately by Chen's Look North and Work the Pacific game plan. You see, I look at it from a APEC point of view, and ironically, PNG's membership into APEC can also be linked to the security issues and activities surrounding its shared land border with Indonesia. You see, in this slide, the only course of action open to PNG to avoid open confrontation with Indonesia's military might was through diplomacy and the tightening up of formal restrictions in the form of bilateral engagements and arrangements, which would serve as a beacon of cooperation between PNG and Indonesia. See, both governments then commenced talks in a bid to draw up an agreement that would regulate relationship and, more importantly, define rights and obligations along the border. So these talks culminated with the signing of the Treaty of Mutual Respect, Cooperation, and Friendship on 27 October 1986, thereby securing our land borders from any external threats. You see, I think the fathers had the best interests of the newly independent country at heart. So it was foremost in the core of their souls and beings that PNG's initial growth should not be deterred nor hampered by regional security fears and anxieties. As such, the friends to all, enemy to none approach. The fathers wanted this infant nation, our nation, to grow up feeling secure and knowing that it was surrounded by friends, not enemies, as was seen elsewhere in the world that time. So diplomacy was therefore seen as the only way forward in securing Papua New Guinea's borders in a bid to avoid any possible military confrontation with the might of the Indonesian military forces to the west before we could consider regional and international trade. So this treaty was in effect a bilateral non-aggression agreement, which ensured that the two sides avoided, reduced, or contained disputes or conflicts between their nations and settled any differences that may arise only by peaceful means. This is Article 2. And promised that they shall not threaten or use force against each other, Article 7 of the treaty. The treaty also provided both countries with the basis to build a lasting structure of peace and cooperation. And this was enhanced by ASEAN's 1987 decision to allow PNG to become its first non-ASEAN country to accede to the 1976 ASEAN Treaty of Amity and Cooperation in Southeast Asia as a special observer, despite bidding tirelessly, still bidding to become a full member. So you see, during our fact-finding visit to any APEC economy in preparation for APEC 2018 host, I was part of a delegation that visited Jakarta, Indonesia first. We chose Indonesia over all others because they had just finished hosting. And so the APEC team was still intact. So we visited that in December 2013 and met with Foreign Minister Martin Natalegawa. Foreign Minister Martin Natalegawa expressed his wishes. He expressed his wishes that this is actual words that on the issue of PNG's membership to ASEAN, he said, let's host APEC first, and later we can worry about becoming a full member of ASEAN. He explicitly told this to Mr. Jack Carrico, the former Secretary for National Judicial Services, who led our delegation there. So you see, he said it in the nicest possible way. And this picture is me. I was walking past to pick up coffee for Prime Minister O'Neill, and somehow I just was at the right place at the right time, and this photograph was taken between two superpower leaders, President Barack Obama and President Medvedev from Russia. So when we look north and looking north and work in the Pacific, this was Prime Minister Chen's addition to the Look North policy. So these engagements understated the PNG-Indonesia relations in respecting each other's territorial integration under the watchful eyes of their respective memberships of this forum. So becoming a member of APEC was therefore paramount for PNG, as APEC from its very beginning had progressed to regular meetings of leaders where tensions could be calmed and political energies mobilized to deal with priority issues in each other's member states. So you see, this was why Prime Minister Wingti pushed to become a member of APEC. So see, to ensure that our security was also covered with this membership. So the mutual respect for one another built a lot of bridges during these early years to bring the relations to what it is now. I'm referring to PNG and Indonesia, and to enable member economies to deal with their own internal matters while consulting each other on outcomes of each other's actions to ensure harmonious relations to appropriate forums. So this has continued to work well for PNG right up until very recently, when we started to choose new friends, and thereby raising questions from our traditional friends on where we stood and what we value despite our long-standing relations. So it was more or less based on these considerations that PNG undertook to become a member of APEC and the non-aligned movement, purposely to nullify any aggressive opportunistic behavior that may flare up in the border areas in the years to come. Not much thought was put into the economic feasibility of such a venture by the bureaucracy, despite the political will to do so. And this is evident in the fact that between 1993 and 2012, the only substantive policy contributions PNG is officially recorded to have submitted into any APEC process at the senior official level are the individual election plan reports of 1996 in the Philippines, in 2005 in Korea, and then later the IAP, the individual election plan peer review presentations of 2009 in Singapore. Still on looking north and looking the Pacific foreign policy, the president, years after joining APEC in 1993 and the early parts of the year 2000 were trying times for PNG as a country. See, Port Moresby was no different. The PNG Kina had just been floated. The country was anticipating the onset of the much talked about mineral boom, which never eventuated to the levels expected. Crime was rampant, as unemployment soared like never before in the fledgling country's history, and the cost of living went on par with the unemployment rate. GDP growth was uneven in the 1990s, registering 15% in 1993 as new mining investments came on stream, but falling to 3.6% in 1997 and 3.8% in 1998. By 1998, the country was in the most serious financial crisis since independence due to a prolonged drought, the continuing Bogomil crisis, the Asian economic downturn, and the falling value of the kina. So with the support of the World Bank and the IMF, the government embarked on economic reforms, including a program of privatization. In a nutshell, PNG was already struggling economically when it joined APEC. So Papua New Guinea's participation in APEC from that point up to 2014 was very ordinary. It was ordinary to the extent that it was deemed normal by many economists to see one or two delegates from PNG regularly darting in between meetings every day for the duration of the senior official meeting process, simply because there just wasn't enough Papua New Guineans to go around covering all the meetings during the day. And it's hilarious because during the day there was hardly any Papua New Guineans, but in the night during the receptions they will all mobilize. They will all come out from the woodworks. But still, there were valiant officers who maintained stride in its membership obligations, if only to ensure that capacity building programs were accepted. Now, during this, despite the shortcomings, PNG leaders used the APEC process. Now, this is going back to the APEC process and the fact that you can meet anytime. So on the margins of the APEC meetings. So PNG leaders used the APEC process to convene bilateral meetings with their APEC counterparts. So, for instance, the Thai President Yingluck Shinawatra visited PNG on the 25th of March 2013 at Prime Minister O'Neill's behest. This invitation had been extended and accepted during the PNG-Thai bilateral meeting on the margins of the 2012 leaders meeting in Vladivostok, Russia. New Zealand's Foreign Minister Murray Macaulay also visited in November 2012, and this is also another example of a result of bilateral meetings and invitations extended. Now, APEC remains part of the Look North foreign policy. Okay. Now, regarding hosting, that's another issue. See, and we can see from this presentation today that our officials were more comfortable dealing in the Pacific than in Asia. For obvious reasons, we did not have that much needed capacity to deal with Asia. And a lot was happening in Asia during that time for us to concentrate it upon, as what I had mentioned earlier on. And it exposed our shortcomings. So I'll stop there and open the floor to questions. There's been a very heavy session, but I needed to squeeze all this in today. Mr. Aguirre, I'll stop sharing also, and we can go back to, and we only have about 10 minutes for Q&As.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Ako, for a very coherent discussion, and it gives us a logical understanding of our foreign policy thus far, and it also puts into perspective what our various leaders have done over the years. So the floor is open for questions, comments from our viewers, for those of you in the Zoom meeting room and for those watching via Facebook. I'll begin by asking a simple, maybe not so simple, I don't know, but according to post-Korea, Pius Wingti was born around 1951, and at age 34, he was the youngest ever prime minister of PNG. So do you think his youth and inexperience played a role in the decisions that he made, from what you have gathered so far about his Look North policy and his reign as PM?
That's a very strong question, and I would not discount. I would not hinge much on inexperience. You see, he came from a generation of leaders who were not part of the colonial struggle. You see, so he saw that growing up. He wasn't part of the struggle, but he saw that growing up. And so when he came on board, and when he became prime minister, he already had a mindset of going in the other way the fathers had done. And it's very, I consider it very important to note. And in 2019, there was an article in the papers when he explained why he pushed for APEC, for PNG to join APEC. And then I never considered it while heading up the APEC secretariat going up. It was all about hosting. All concentrations were done on hosting. But then after the hosting, when we look back and when we look back at the genesis of our the Look North policy and then securing the APEC membership, it was very important. Like I mentioned earlier on, the political will was there for us to join APEC. When you pay a more when you Google APEC FEDA and its importance, we will realize that our opportunities for economic prosperity lies in APEC. You see, APEC provides more than 57% of the world's market are in the APEC region. And you would consider why we are wasting our time pushing for dominance in the Pacific region when our people have to eat. And when people want to eat, they go to market. They don't go to places where there's no market. We have to play in the marketplace. And governments, the current government, effective governments, have always talked about market access. And Prime Minister Wingti, when he came on board and when he said, "Look North," people were making there were some ordinary jokes about looking north. Every time you made reference to Asians, you were saying you're looking north. But people didn't realize, you see, when he made the declaration to look north, you had the Asian century, where everything was happening. The Asian tigers were coming out. And one wonders what our bureaucrats were thinking about. The Asian century, all the opportunities was up there. We already had a foreign policy of look north and active and selective engagement. I personally think our thoughts were clouded by becoming a member of ASEAN. And the Singaporean foreign minister during that bilateral in 2009 said it clearly. Skin color I'm different. We will not become a member of ASEAN. That's why we keep on struggling today. And I've always maintained the fact that you have 10 out of the 10 ASEAN members, 7 of them are in APEC. And APEC provides the bilateral avenue for officials, ministers, and leaders to meet every year. we can drive our agenda there instead of trying to go and still struggling to become a member of us. And also the regional dynamics have changed also, Mr. Aguirre. So I don't think he was inexperienced. Of course, the fathers would call him inexperienced because he was rowing the other way. But when we look back at that, I think he did the right thing. And when he opened up that gateway up that way, it opened up in the last 20 years now, we can see that it opened up our relationship also with the Asian countries.
Thank you, Mr. Ako. We have a question from Matilda.
Good morning, Mr. Ko, and thank you for the presentation. It was very informative. I have just one question in line to the Look Not policy. From your experience and from your expert knowledge, what do you think about the heavy Asian influx in the country? Do you think it is the result of the Look Not policy? From your opinion, thank you.
Yes and no. Yes, it's a result of the Look Not policy, but no, it is a result of our institutions' lack of compliance and enforcing our laws. We have laws. We have migration laws. We have laws. Law pulmaplo yumi. But our enforcement boasts a question. You look at you look at the Australian economy. They have trade agreements with Asia and with China, and they allow all that, but they make sure that their visas are regulated to the extent that only genuine tourists and genuine business people enter. Or if some of the transnational criminals sneak through the dragnet, they have systems in place to go after them. And when we compare it with our systems, we lack in that area. That's my personal opinion, Matilda.
Thank you, Mr. Ko.
Yeah, to add on, you have to look at the growth pattern or the period in which the countries, the East Asian tigers, as well as China, how the economy grew. And China started the reform in 1979, and during the 80s, it was growing rapidly as a developing country, and the economy was changing. It started opening up, and that's how businesses, Chinese businesses and entrepreneurs started coming out, and they started investing in other countries. So you have to also look at the timeline, the economic development timeline, to see that it was also another major reason why we have this influx of business people and businesses from Asia going out, in particular China, going out to other countries in the Pacific and around the world. Yeah. So the Look Not was just, us being observant, looking at the circumstances that were changing, and then coming up with a policy in order to tie it with China's growth pattern at that period of time or point of time. That's one factor we can connect that to the influx of Asian businesses in our country. Any other questions or comments from Mr. Ako? Mr. Ako, just one clarification. Similar to the friends to all, enemies to none. If you listen to many political commentators nowadays, they keep on confusing our foreign policy, foreign policies over the years. And we say that our current foreign policies Look Not. Some commentators say that, some say that it's friends to all, enemies to none. And if you study it systematically, you'll see that we have different periods, different leaders. That's what we're trying to do in this study or in this course of ours. So we've identified Look North with Pius Wingti, Look North Work the Pacific with Sir Julius Chen. So what is your take on that? Our commentators not knowing our foreign policy timeline and then confusing the country as a whole by making public statements that, our foreign policy is friends to all, enemies to none.
I think it's a simple lack of ignorance and the understanding of the dynamics in international relations and foreign policy. Yeah. The ignorance can result from their unwillingness to accept advice from people in the know, or it's their idea of it. I mean, that was one of the reasons why we earlier on in the series we were talking about making foreign policy part of the law. Enshrining it in the constitution, so then it will help the leaders understand their directions they're supposed to talk on. That's my take on it. And it's a good thing that the new foreign policy review is coming up, and the results will come out in the next 12 months' time, and the leaders will become more aware of what international relations really is.
All right, thank you, Mr. Ako. We'll continue the discussion this Friday when we look at Mr. Ako's pictorial, his life in China in pictures, and also we'll connect it with the discussion that we should have had last week on public service. But I thank you all, our viewers on... okay, there's a question from Matilda. Okay, Matilda, go ahead, please, before we wrap up.
Sorry, Mr. I will be presenting my symposium on Friday on foreign policy, so I just want to clear something in case people might ask questions regarding my presentation. So my question is the look not policy word of mouth policy, or it's an actual policy? We have like it's a written policy. My question is to Mr. Ako. Thank you. Sorry.
No, God, I don't think it's a written policy. Note that the only written policy is the 1982 one. And then all of them are just tweaking it. There could be submissions or briefs on that, but I wouldn't know about that. But the only written official written policy will be the one that's coming out again the next 12 months.
Thank you, Mr. Ako.
All right, thank you, Matilda, for that. All right, Temptas, well, thank you, Mr. Ako. Thank you, Trulo. Time blue na. Have a nice day. We'll meet again on Friday.
Everyone have a nice day. Study hard, study strong. See you on Friday. Bye.
All right. Bye for now.